don't worry, mas maikli tong part na to, promise. We'll talk a bit about open source. So, yung question yung poll was about if you've ever used open source software. 75% answered yes. Around 25% answered no. But when I asked, have you ever used Firefox, VLC, or an Android phone, 100% of you answered yes. That's interesting. Why? Because Firefox, VLC, and Android are all open source. So if you've ever used Firefox, VLC, or an Android phone, then yes, you've used open source software. Nice now. Trick question, sir. So we go back to the free and open Adobo. So the free and open Adobo, I've mentioned that before. It also works with open source. Same idea. Only this time we're talking about software. We're talking about applications. So what does open source mean, really? So it refers to software or applications whose source code, or basically instructions needed to make the software work, is open. And we've discussed what openness mean kanina. Free to use, access, modify. So because the source code is open, then you can actually modify it. Pwede kang gumawa ng extensions, pwede mong bawasan ng features, pwede kang magdagdag ng features, and you can always build the application from source. Ibig sabihin, at any time, kung gusto mong mag-install, kahit hindi installation, mag-build, you're free to do so. So the free and open source software refers to free as in freedom, tulad ng sinabi ko kanina. It's the 4 essential freedoms. Again, the freedom to run the program as you wish, freedom to study and change the program. With that freedom, dapat may access ka to source code, freedom to share the program, and also freedom to share the modified version of your program. So why open source? Ano yung usefulness niya for an LGU, and even for you personally as an individual? Well, you can enjoy a lot of advantages. One, lower cost of acquisition. I've not pirated or used personally. Have not pirated or used proprietary software in a while. Most of what I work with and what I use are open source solutions. And mas mababa yung cost. And if you scale that to not just one person, to an entire organization, malaki yung savings. There's also no vendor lock-in. Ibig sabihin, in case gusto mong magpalit ng systems, hindi ka, may choices ka. May choices ka kung sino yung pwede mong kunin, sino mong pwedeng i-partner with. And in the event na, kumbaga, hindi naman siguro mangyari, pero in the event na yung only vendor mo sa Pilipinas or even in the world ay nawala, na bankrupt, ongoing pa rin yung maging systems mo. Hindi ka affected nun. There's a lot of opportunities for growth, learning, and self-development. Sabi ko nga, being open source, you actually allow your people to learn more about their systems and about the applications they're creating or they're working with. Hindi lang kayo button pushers na black box yung nasa harap nyo. Na pag pinindot mo to, alam mo yung output pero hindi mo alam kung paano siya ginawa. At kung magkaroon ng problema, hindi mo siya masosolve yourself. Kailangan mo siyang idaan sa tech support at mag-aantay ka kung kailan nila solve yun. For open source, that's not a problem. Something na nangyari sa akin personally was when I was using GIS, and there was an issue in one of the processes of the application. What I did was I asked sa community, and this is what's amazing about open source. There's a whole community around it. So yung idea na walang support sa open source, it's not true. So I asked sa community, sa mailing list, sa bug reports, may nakita akong ganitong bug. Anyone has an idea how to solve it? And within a matter of minutes, may nag-reply sa akin, ganito siya isosolve. just do this and do that, edit this part of the source code, dito mo siya mahanap. And I had two choices. I could either wait for it to be patched sa 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 next release, or I could do it myself. And because it's open source, I could do it myself, and I could solve my problem right there and then, without really waiting for someone else to do it, or without waiting for the company owning my software na na gamitin yun, na ayusin yun. And of course, it democratizes technology and access technology a lot. This is a big thing, especially in terms of education and especially in terms of access. Kasi I have to admit, if you're going to use, especially your constituents, your citizens, if you're gonna require them to use proprietary software without giving them alternatives, or without giving them yung pambili ng proprietary software na yun, kung hindi nyo naman libre siyang ibibigay, mahirap yun. How much does a valid license for proprietary software ngayon? How much is a valid license for Microsoft? Office pa rin ba siya? 365? How much is a valid license for Windows? And hindi naman siguro tawag dyan, hindi naman siguro appropriate na pwede naman kami mamirata eh. Di ba? Pwede naman kami mamirata. We all know piracy is against the law. Piracy is a crime. And yung niya ngayon, mas mataas ngayon yung makukuha mong sa piracy because of the anti-cybercrime law. Mas mataas na yung penalties niya. So if we're focusing too much on proprietary and we're telling people that ito yung system namin, gamitin nyo to kasi walang ibang option and it's proprietary, you're basically telling them it's either you buy it or you pirate it. And in both ways, talo sila. It's either gagasto sila or gagawa sila ng krimen. And that shouldn't be the case. There's a lot of open source software na matitindi, malalakas, and readily available. Free and open source means, di ba, freedom to use. Kasama doon yung freedom to access and freedom to install. You can't pirate open source software. Download mo siya ngayon. Go to Firefox. Go to LibreOffice.org. Go to QGIS.org. Hanapin nyo sa Google yung GraphGIS, Postgres. You can all install it right now without paying anything. Well, you probably pay for the bandwidth of your internet, pero for the software itself, wala kayong babayaran. And that's the same opportunities that you're extending to people when you go open source. Diba? But Ben, isn't open source only for techie people? Yeah. Open source is for techie people. 21 out of around 1/4, 1/3 of you said that. Not really, if you've ever used Firefox, Firefox is open source. So if you're using Firefox now, sa Facebook, Twitter, or watching this, you're using open source. If you have an Android phone right now, you are using open source. If you've ever watched anything on VLC, you're already using open source. If you've looked at something on Wikipedia, yung base niya, which is MediaWiki, if I'm not mistaken, is open source. You can even create your own, diba, wikis nakamukha ng Wikipedia. And for those developers, IT people, if your website sa LGU is built on WordPress, Drupal, React, these frameworks, they're all open source frameworks. So when people say na wala namang gumagamit na open source, it's only for techie people, it's hard to use, you're actually probably already using it without you knowing. And it's kumbaga, it's time na we try to avoid yung mga myths na yan na mahirap gamitin yung open source. It's not. It's the same with any kind of software. At the start, baka mahirap, pero once you get to learn it, to use it, mas madali na lang siya. Parang yung first time mong gumamit ng Windows, first time mong gumamit ng Microsoft Word, hindi ka naman expert agad doon, agad-agad. What promise from now, yung for example, some other open source applications, for your operating system, you can use Linux. For your Office suite, you can use LibreOffice or Collabora. Halos one-to-one yung features ng LibreOffice. In fact, fun anecdote, nagsimula ako sa OpenOffice at LibreOffice more than a decade ago kasi meron silang dati, export directly to PDF na function. Nawala dati yung Microsoft Office. Years back, meron na sila nun. So mas madali kaya sila yung kaya ginamit ko sila kasi sa Microsoft. Plus a bit of history, yung OpenOffice at LibreOffice, meron siyang option sa page setup ng long coupon band. Of isang Pinoy yung nag-send ng na yun, nung request na yun, at dinagdag nila as option sa LibreOffice. Kasi kung titingnan mo sa iba, dati gagawa pa ng custom page size. Sa LibreOffice meron ng direct na long coupon band na options. There are a lot of other applications built na open source na very powerful. QGIS and GRASS, these are geographic information systems that I personally use and I provide training for, and very powerful enough na kaya mong gamitin in any enterprise level GIS. You have data portals na open source, SICAN and DICAN. You have image processing, GIMP, Inkscape. Tapos you have stuff for design like Blender, QCAD. And then some people ask, but isn't open source not secure? Kumbaga. And it's actually one of the biggest biggest thing na maybe it's not secure, but the thing is it's not really about being open source or proprietary when it comes to security. Both of them are probably have the same level of risk. It's more about the organization maintaining it, if it's being published or open yung analysis nila versus it being closed. Kasi kung open yung analysis tsaka yung pag-publish ng risks, mas madali siyang makikita at mapapatch ng mga tao. Kung closed, syempre sila lang yung nakakaalam. And then, is it regularly audited, reviewed, or updated? So kung open source man yan, proprietary, if it's not maintained and it's not updated, most probably maraming security risks dyan. So for example, if you're still using Microsoft XP, if you're still using Vista, those are not supported anymore, not maintained. So kahit na proprietary software yan, it's probably more of a security risk than using Linux right now. Yeah. So it's not really a binary between open source and proprietary yung security. It's more about how yung security protocols are used. And in terms of desktop, I've not had any issues with viruses since nag-start ako mag-Linux. I'm not sure about people using Windows, kung kailan yung time na of course you can use them on virtualized environments, but that would utilize din yung computer mo resources. And if you don't have large resources, RAM, parang nagpapatakbo ka ng more than 1 to 3 operating systems, and yung RAM mo 4 gig lang, medyo mahirap yun na gawin. Even if you virtualize it, and medyo it defeats the purpose. If you virtualize it, you can just utilize something else. Sana. Where is open source used? A lot. Open source has went to Mars. That's one thing na lamang kaysa sa proprietary. Sabi nga, open source is used in space because you can't open Windows in space. So open source has gone to Mars already. And then you have open source for supercomputers. the top 500 top 500 supercomputers in the world all run on Linux. Yan. So when you talk about power, customizability, security, it's not really about, it's not a dichotomy, hindi siya binary nga. It's about how you use it and the people who are actually using it. There have been several approaches, several instances where local governments migrated to open source, and they've shown na may usefulness yung migration na yun. And for example, you have legacy systems, and legacy systems will destroy you in the future. If you have a lot of legacy systems na available, maybe it's time to start thinking about how to update those legacy systems. Diba? There's a reason why they're called legacy. Kung hindi na sila supported, hindi na sila kailan pa tayo magsa-start? Diba? Kung hindi ngayon, kailan? And if you have the option to update, upgrade, become better, why not? Diba? Mahirap kung puro legacy systems yung gamit natin. It's something na will bite us, diba? It will bite us in the future. Parang ganun. Example of why, example lang of how, example lang of where openness happens, kumbaga. Sabi ko dati, we did mapping for COVID and for Taal before, and we were able to do that because we were utilizing open source solutions. And recently, di ba, lumabas yung mga community pantries, and within a few days, my friends from the Ministry of Mapping were able to map 358 community pantries as of kanina umaga. And you can actually go to the website saan yan, .github.io/ saan may community pantry, to see nasaan yung mga community pantries na to. And we're able to do that they were able to do that in 2-3 days from there, because they were utilizing open source solutions. And hindi sila limited sa kung paano lang gawin. And it's not just that, utilizing the same data set that was shared by people. Meron din kami isang kaibigan na gumawa siya, paano ka pupunta sa community pantry from your location using open source software and open source solutions. Na dineploy mo within a few days, a few hours of getting the data. Kasi hindi mo kailangang humingi ng permission to use the data. Hindi mo kailangang humingi ng permission to use the software. Because you're pretty much free and open to utilize these things. So I'll finish this up with our Open LGU initiative in SmartCT. If you want to be part of it, if you want to try to see where open data and open source comes in your LGUs, maybe you want to talk with us about our initiative. So we're doing some free and open source awareness campaign to raise awareness and bring open source to the people. Yun nga, open source is here, and we just need more people to probably be more aware about it. Adopting schools and libraries with open source, computer laboratories. It can function as a training ground, as a free space for people to learn about open source. People can teach and train there. It can also be a hub for a local open source community. We're also looking at, I think I mentioned this last time, FOSS for Edu. So here it's a project in the pipeline where we want to teach students and educators skills about open source, open data, open hardware, how to refurbish computers, and then provide them with the the chance to have their own computing machine. So may curriculum kami, matututo sila how to refurbish computers, how to install open source software, how to use open source software. And at the end of the curriculum, they can take home yung computing machines nila. Sa kanila na yun. It also allows for opportunities to help educators become more knowledgeable about open source, how to include it in their own learning curricula. We're looking at establishing local Linux user groups and open source communities. Sobrang powerful ng community. Again, kung nakita niyo yung community pantry map, that was only made possible because of the power of community. Yung community pantry itself is a a testament to the power of community, and the map is also a testament to the power of community. So we want to have people who will advocate for it, and put open source at the forefront of their of what they're doing. And of course, ang start lagi namin when we always say software inventory and assessment for local governments. So ano yung digital assets nyo? Ano yung software that you're currently using? Find areas for improvement, possible opportunities, possible threats in terms of those digital assets and software, and then help and support if you want to transition to open source alternatives. Yun naman yung beauty ng open source and the free and open approach. If you don't want to do it, you're not forced to do it. If you want to remain with what you have, you're not forced to do it. It's a very free and open approach. But if you are interested in transitioning, then there's help and support available. If you want to transition into a more open source approach and open source alternatives. And lastly, we have of course, if you help in the transition, you also have to train people to capacitate them. So digital literacy training with free and open source software. This could include basic skills, how to install and uninstall applications, how to use Office work with stuff like LibreOffice, how to send emails. Kung marunong ka naman mag-Firefox, it's not really a matter. Pero ano yung mga slight differences and nuances between dun sa mga nasanay natin before and yung mga open source alternatives. And of course, it could also be advanced digital literacy skills, programming with Python. Python is open source. Geographic information system training with QGIS, open source tools for working with data, Linux, DevOps, BSD certifications. I would like to say na SmartCT has a partnership with LPI, the Linux Professional Institute in the Philippines, and part of our partnership is we're able to provide discounts for people who would want to get certifications on Linux Pro, DevOps, BSD, Linux Essentials. So parte din yun ng mga ginagawa namin, and what we're trying to do to encourage more people to use open source and put open source as part of what they're doing. So last, as I said, mas maikli naman to. Yun. That's the ask. We want to build a future that's fair, free, open, and smart. And the challenge is, will you be or do you want to be a trailblazer? They want to be the first. They want to be one of the first, actually, not just in the Philippines, but in probably ASEAN region to do this. And if that's the case, then we encourage you. Message us. Feel free to work with us in DILG-IVA to help make it a reality. So that's it. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig. I give the floor back to our host, and we're free to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.